Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. And each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I seek to provide a brief introduction to two of the upcoming assigned Bible readings for Sunday. In this video, we're going to look at the Old Testament reading assigned for Reformation Sunday, October 31st, 2021, Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34. Some background on Jeremiah. Jeremiah, we might recall, was a child, a youth, maybe a teenager, when God called Jeremiah to be his prophet. And there was some hemming and hawing about being too young and not qualified. Like many prophets, there's a little reluctance to be the mouthpiece for God. But Jeremiah is a major prophet. He covers about 40 years of the history of Israel. And in the latter 20 years after he started being a prophet, he began to write down his sermons and his prophecies. And he actually had a secretary named Baruch who recorded many of these things. Jeremiah is believed to have died in captivity in 586 BCE, having started in 626 BCE. So that's a 40-year period. We don't know if Jeremiah died going into exile in Babylon, or some believe he went to Egypt. But obviously it was not a good time at the end of his life. During his ministry, the Middle East, like it is even today, was filled with all sorts of conflict. There are various regional powers trying to seek control of trade routes, resources, the flow of goods. And so there was conflict in Egypt. Prior to Jeremiah, the kingdom of Israel and Judah were going at it with each other and having various alliances. Syria was a rising power, then crushed by the Assyrians, who got close to Judah in the south and Jerusalem, but then they had internal problems, and so there was a power vacuum, and so the troops pulled back before they conquered Jerusalem. And then the Babylonians came and overthrew the Assyrian Empire, and they made it all the way to Jerusalem on their way to Egypt. And they hauled out the best and the brightest of Jerusalem and Judah, and they destroyed the Temple of Solomon. Jeremiah's message, the context for his preaching, for his prophesying, was disaster and uncertainty. And he lifted up that chaos was the result of God's judgment on God's people, Israel, or Judah, because the northern tribe of Israel, northern tribes consisting of Israel, had already been taken off into exile under Assyria. This judgment was upon their unfaithfulness. And the major prophets, they dealt with speaking out against idolatry, the first commandment being violated, you shall have no other gods before me. There was injustice, treatment of the poor and the marginalized. There was ritual impurity. There was empty ritualism, where people were going to worship but not putting their faith into practice in daily life. And there was sexual immorality tied to the worship of Baal or Ashtoreth, the pagan gods of the neighboring tribes or neighboring nations. His listeners, Jeremiah's listeners, thought that he was a heretic, and some thought he was insane, and his opponents wanted to put him to death. Jeremiah's family and friends, they rejected him, they abandoned him, they left him. So Jeremiah was often seen or recorded as the weeping prophet, kind of wondering, why did I ever listen to you, God? I've only known grief. I've only known sorrow. I've only known ridicule. But Jeremiah hung in there for 40 years. He sought to communicate that God was heartbroken. God wanted the people of Judah to return, to turn back, to repent. And God could and would restore them to a right relationship. The section that our reading for Sunday comes is out of Jeremiah 30, verse 1 to 31, verses 40, and it's often called the Book of Comfort by Bible scholars. So these are words of hope, words of encouragement, words of promise. So it's not all doom and gloom, which is a little bit of change from some of the earlier chapters in Jeremiah. One writer said that after afflicting the comfortable, Jeremiah brings a word from God to comfort the afflicted. And within this two-chapter section, we have God will restore the fortunes of God's people. They will serve the Lord, and God will save them. Imagine hearing those words when you have been forced into exile. You've seen loved ones die or perish due to hunger or conflict. Here is a promise that God is still with you, and God will provide, but you have to turn back and trust God. The exiles do return in 536 BCE under the edict of Cyrus. And so as they return, even though Israel has not been faithful to God, God's love is everlasting and does not depend on human help. This is an important theme throughout Jeremiah, that God is going to put up with human rebellion. God is going to put up with our unfaithfulness, but that doesn't mean God has to change and resort to acting like us. God will do what God needs to do and God wants to do, and that's to love us and to restore us. Jeremiah 31:28, leading into our text for Sunday. And just as I've watched over them to pluck up and break down, to overthrow, destroy, and bring evil, so I will watch over them build and to plant, says the Lord. So out of the destruction, the chaos, the horror of the past, God is able to see a future. And that future is going to involve rebuilding and planting and restoration, and some might even say resurrection. Here's the text, verses 31 and 34 of chapter 31. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Let's just kind of walk through these four short verses, 31 to 32. God is the one who makes the covenant. The Israelites don't do it. God initiates. And in good Lutheran theology, we say that is grace. The people don't deserve this, but God is willing to initiate and make this new covenant. The covenant is new. It's going to be different than the previous covenants made with Abraham, made with Moses, made with Noah, made with David. It's going to be different because, again, God is going to maintain it, and it's not going to be dependent on the people. Israel's ancestors in the audience hearing these words know all about breaking covenants with God. Maybe we know that as well. And in a sense, as God references here about the Ten Commandments and God delivering them out of slavery in Egypt and gave them the Ten Commandments, the Sinai covenant or the Mosaic covenant, and they broke it, God feels like a husband finding his spouse committing adultery. Imagine that. Some of you watching this have had that experience. Some of you know what it's like to be betrayed, violated, have your heart broken. God understands that. But then verse 33, God's going to resolve and work through that brokenness and that pain. God will put the law within them. God will write it on their hearts. So we don't need tablets anymore. It's going to be within humanity. And the covenant is a simple one in this case. I will be their God. and they will be my people. And even though they're not going to be perfect people, even though they will still be sinners and rebellious and probably still chase after other gods, God's not going to abandon them or give up on them. God has chosen them. God has chosen us. Verse 34, all the people of Israel will know God, the least to the greatest. This is an inclusive covenant. It's not dependent on status or performance. And how does this work? Because God will forgive their iniquity. Isn't that how any relationship that's been fractured can be restored? It requires forgiveness. But in this case, God is the forgiver. And God says, I will remember their sin no more. Think about that. How often do we recall past offenses? Things that have happened to us, done to us by others. Or how often do we dwell on the things that we know are not pleasing to God and we know are an offense to God? God lets it go. God remembers it no more. So when people joke about going to the pearly gates and facing God and having to make an account of their life, and they start telling all the things that they did or didn't do, guess what God says? I don't remember it. I just love you. For Christians, as we hear this text out of Jeremiah, and we have to be careful, the people hearing this word first in the original audience of Jeremiah, they didn't have Jesus. They didn't have Easter and Good Friday and Easter. So we have to keep this in context. But for Christians, we hear these words and we see Jesus fulfilling that covenant. So Christians believe God made this new covenant in the death and resurrection of Jesus. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, 1 Corinthians 11:25 records. This covenant of unconditional love comes through the cross of God's Son. The recipient of the new covenant of Jesus is all humankind. The promise to wipe away sin comes to fulfillment on the cross and reaches out to all people. And again, in this new covenant of Jesus, who's the actor and who's the recipient? Who's the initiator and who's the one that receives the gifts? God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. And Jeremiah records it. And every time you and I take communion, we are reminded that God has established a new covenant through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ to remember our sin no more. God bless you. Take care.